The train screeched into the edge of nowhere, steam hissing like an old ghost losing its grip on the world. Dust swept the platform, curling around her blue velvet hem. She stepped down with her head held still, spine proud, but her fingers trembled where they clutched the handle of a worn valise. The station agent blinked at her two long gloves, her wide-brimmed hat pinned with delicate lace. She didn't belong, and every breeze whispered it. The town, if it could be called that, was a clutch of wooden ribs against the open sky, a saloon with a crooked sign, a general store that leaned eastward, a chapel without a steeple, and far beyond it, the land stretched like a hell breath, brown, gold, untamed. She didn't look back at the train. Her world had ended with its whistle. She walked, not knowing where to go. Her boots, polished to a shine, had never touched real dirt. They sank a little with each step, until dust coated the velvet of her skirt. A boy in patched trousers watched from behind a water trough. A woman with 3 daughters stared from a porch, mouth thin with judgment. It was the older woman in the sun hat, who finally stood. Her skin was weathered like dry parchment, but her gaze held no cruelty, just curiosity, perhaps recognition. "You came from the east," the woman said, not unkindly. She nodded, didn't give her name. The letter said not to. The woman beckoned. "Then you'd best have tea while he rides in." They walked to a house that creaked with history. A small place, painted once in pale green, now faded to memory. Inside, the scent of lavender and ash. The kettle moaned as it boiled. They didn't talk much. The young woman sat with her gloves still on, staring into the cup like it might tell her fortune. "You're the bride," the older woman said finally. "He asked me to meet the train. He doesn't like crowds." She nodded again. Bride. The word sat strange on her tongue. Not like in stories. No veil. No lace altar. Just a name changed, a past discarded, and a man's quiet promise in a scrawled letter. "I won't ask questions. Come if you want peace." He hadn't described himself. That felt important now, in the stillness. The woman offered a biscuit. She took it without tasting. "You ain't the first to run west," the woman said gently. "But you might be the first who brought silk." A flicker of humor touched her mouth, then vanished. She had packed one dress only. The blue velvet one. The same she wore when everything ended. Back east, she had lived behind chandeliers and garden hedges, where a girl's worth could be measured in her posture, her silence, her skill at smiling when ignored. She had almost been married, once, to a man whose gaze slid past her like water off glass. His family approved until they didn't. Something changed. She still didn't know if it was the rumors about her sister, or her refusal to sign away her dowry, or just that she had opinions. Either way, the invitations were burned, her belongings packed, and when she spoke too plainly at a garden party, her father had said, cold and low, "If you cannot be silent, be gone." So she was gone. Outside, hooves approached. The woman rose and looked out the window. That'll be him. She stood, smoothing the front of her dress. Her heart beat fast, not with fear, but something worse. Hope. The rider was not what she expected. He did not wear a hat. His hair was dark and cropped close. His coat, plain and worn. There was no flourish in his dismount, no glance to the side to see if he impressed. He tied the horse, adjusted the saddle straps, then stood a moment with his hand resting on the animal's flank, quiet as stone. When he entered the house, he removed his gloves, then waited near the door until invited in. The older woman waved him forward. "She's here." His eyes met hers, and she saw not hunger, nor calculation, nor appraisal. Just patience. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, rough-edged, not cruel. She dipped her head, slightly. He did not step closer. "I don't know what you were promised," he said, tone even. "But I can offer quiet. Work if you want it. Rest if you don't." She took a breath. "I came for peace." He nodded once. "You'll have it." He looked to the older woman. "I'll take her up to the Ridge House, if she's rested." "I'm ready." He turned, and she followed. They rode in silence. She'd never ridden before, not truly. Not without servants nearby, or side-saddle nonsense. He offered his horse without ceremony, then walked beside her reins, leading the way. The land changed as they climbed, scrub turning to gold grass, the hills unfolding like a hymn sung by the earth. A hawk turned above them once, its cry sharp against the still sky. The house appeared slowly, like it didn't want to intrude. Built into the hill, its stone walls caught the late sun. A small porch, 2 chairs, no fence. She dismounted, stiff and aching. He steadied her arm, then let go. Inside it was clean and spare, with walls of fireplace, a table for 2, no photographs, no lace. He showed her the back room, a bed with a thick quilt, a window facing west. "I'll sleep on the porch tonight," he said. She turned. "That's not necessary. I don't take what's not offered," he replied. She said nothing, but her throat tightened. That night, she sat by the window watching the stars rise. Back east, the stars were hidden by smoke and pride. Here, they blinked without shame. She placed her valise at the foot of the bed, but didn't open it. She lay awake a long time. Once, she heard him shift in the porch chair. Not restless, just present. She closed her eyes. In her dream, she walked through tall grass. No corset, no eyes watching, just wind. When morning came, the sky blushed pink behind the hills. She stepped onto the porch barefoot. He was there, boots off, one foot resting on his knee, sipping coffee. He offered her a cup. She took it. They didn't speak for a long while. The quiet was not empty. It was full of breathing things. She glanced down at her dress. The velvet was dusted with journey and memory. She brushed it half-heartedly. "I can sew," she said quietly. "And I'm good with numbers." He nodded. "There's work if you want it. But I didn't send for a servant." "What did you send for?" He looked out at the sunrise a moment, then said, "Someone who wouldn't break under sky this wide." She swallowed hard. "I almost did," she whispered. He shook his head once. "But you didn't." They sat together until the sun crested the hills. Later, she unpacked her things. Just the basics. A brush, a book, 2 letters folded thin from rereading. At the bottom of the case lay a brooch, ivory and gold, from a world that had tried to erase her. She left it in the drawer. That afternoon, she helped the ranch hand count the supply barrels. The man was missing 2 fingers and whistled as he worked. He called her Miss, not Madam. She liked that. In town, the postmistress squinted at her dress and muttered something about women forgetting their place. The older widow swatted the comment down like a fly. "She has a place," she said firmly. "It's here." By dusk, she was exhausted, but her breath felt her own. That evening, he made stew. It wasn't good, but it was warm. She thanked him. He didn't smile, but he nodded. That was enough. He handed her a small book before retreating to the porch. A collection of poems. Her favorite author. Inside the cover, her name. Not the one she had been born with. The one she had signed at the end of the letter westward. She blinked back the sting behind her eyes. That night, she stood at the window again. The stars were bright, but she was no longer afraid of the dark between them. Tomorrow, she would write her first letter home, to no one in particular, just to prove she still had a voice. Outside, the wind moved through the grass like a hymn. And on the porch, the man who had not asked her to explain herself shifted in his chair. She was not in love. Not yet. But she felt, for the first time in years, that she had not been purchased or pitted. She had been welcomed. And sometimes that was the beginning of every kind of love worth having. She woke to the sound of hooves fading into distance, the morning sun resting warm on the floorboards like a dog at peace. The air smelled of pine smoke and coffee grinds, and for the first time in many months, no door had been locked behind her. She could walk out. No one would stop her. The freedom unsettled her more than the velvet rejection of East Coast drawing rooms ever had. The dress she wore was wrinkled now, the blue dulled with dust, the hem tired from travel. She folded it carefully, not out of vanity, but reverence. It was the last relic of the girl who left her name on a torn letter in a marble hallway and boarded a train westward with no return address. She dressed in borrowed cotton, plain, sturdy, honest. The sleeves did not whisper wealth. They made no promises. She liked that. He had left her breakfast. Not a plate set or a grand meal, but warm cornbread, wrapped in a napkin beside the stove, and a note with 2 words, "Take time." Outside, the ranch breathed around her. Chickens moved like gossip through the yard. The barn leaned with a kind of patience. The mountains beyond wore their morning shadows like old cloaks. She sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee that tasted like charcoal and earth and memory. The ranch hand, the one with missing fingers, approached leading a young mare with a freckled muzzle. He tipped his hat, more out of ritual than courtesy. "You ride?" he asked. "No." He shrugged. "Then you'll learn." There was no teasing in it, no cruelty. Just the flat certainty of time passing. She followed him to the barn. He spoke sparingly, pointing, demonstrating, letting her try and err. The horse didn't trust her. She didn't blame it. She didn't trust herself yet either. Her gloves, long and once elegant, were quickly discarded. They served no purpose here. Her fingers, once painted for piano keys and parlor fans, now wrapped rope, tug buckles, brushed grain from dusty mainies. He watched from the fence line that first day, arms crossed. He did not comment when she slipped in the mud or flinched at a whip crack in the distance. But he brought her water after, and a towel for her hands. "I won't break," she said, voice small but steady. "I know," he replied. Then returned to his work. She slept early that night, her body sore in unfamiliar places. But her heart was quiet. In the following days, the rhythm settled. Mornings began with heat from the stove and the sound of boots outside her door. She worked with the ranch hand, mending tack, sorting grain sacks, even helping with the books, when he found out she could add without fingers or ink stains. "Bankman like you," he muttered one day. "We hate him." She smiled. It surprised them both. When she met the cattle, they were less frightening than she'd imagined. Large, yes, and unpredictable, but not malicious. They reminded her of people, in a way, watchful, hungry, not quick to trust, but not impossible. He rode beside her once as she tried the mare again. He didn't give advice, just matched her pace. When the horse startled at a jackrabbit, she panicked, gripped the reins too tightly, jerked sideways. He caught her arm, steadied her, said only, "Easy now." She looked at him then, not his hands, not his boots, but him. His eyes were not beautiful in the traditional sense, but they were the color of river stones after rain, weathered, steady, shaped by years of silence. "You don't talk much," she said. "No reason to fill the sky with noise." She didn't smile that time, but she understood. Back east, silence had been punishment. Cold rooms and colder dinners. Here it was space, a kindness, a way of letting things grow. The first rain came on a Thursday unannounced. No thunder, just sudden drops that darkened the dust. She stood on the porch and let it wet her sleeves. Her hair clung to her cheekbones. She didn't flinch. He watched from under the barn eave, one arm braced against the wall. She saw something flicker in him then. Not desire, not concern, recognition. Later, she peeled off the damp cotton and stood in front of the hearth wrapped in a borrowed blanket, hair drying in wild curls around her jaw. There were no mirrors in the house, but she saw herself reflected in the way the dog curled near her feet, in the way the floor creaked like a companion returning home. She wasn't beautiful, not in the porcelain way the East demanded, but she was becoming something better, present. One night, she made supper. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm. He ate slowly, said nothing, then washed the dishes afterward while she sat by the fire threading new buttons onto an old shirt. Neither of them called it domestic. It just was. She saw him read sometimes, by lantern light. Not fast, not often. But he read. Books without covers. Stories about rivers, storms, stubborn men. One evening, she brought out her old poetry book, the one he'd gifted with her chosen name inside. She placed it on the table between them. "You left this for me," she said. "I did." "Why?" He paused. "Because you looked like someone who wanted words that didn't lie." She touched the page. "And you? What do you want?" His jaw tensed, Not from anger, but thought. Quiet joy, he said finally. And someone who doesn't scare when I don't speak. She thought of parlors and speeches, of men who flattered but never listened. I'm not scared, she said. No, you're not. That was the longest conversation they'd had. She began to whistle while working. Simple tunes, half-forgotten lullabies from a nanny she no longer remembered. The ranch hand would hum along. Even the dog tilted its head like it understood melody. The town continued to whisper. She heard fragments when she walked with him through the general store, past the feed bins. Too clean. She'll run when winter comes. Mail-order foolery. He ignored it. She learned to. When the preacher's wife sneered at her gloves, clean now, but no longer silk, she simply nodded. I don't mind your suspicion, she said. Only your boredom. That shut the woman up. That night, she left a lavender sprig on the table. A peace offering, or maybe a thank you. He tucked it behind his ear, without a word. Spring deepened. The hills bloomed with soft greens. Coyotes howled less often. One evening, after she'd patched a torn saddle blanket and swept the porch, she stood in the threshold of her room and watched him stoke the fire. Her heart beat strange. Not romantic, not desperate, just present. He turned. You okay? He asked. I was going to offer myself, she said. Voice calm, measured. His brows drew together, not in confusion, in understanding. But then I thought maybe I don't owe you that. You don't, he said. I'm not sure what you want. He poked the fire. I want you to know you're not currency. She stood silent. I won't take what's offered just because it's out of fear, he said. She nodded once. Thank you, she whispered. Sleep well. She did. In the early hours before dawn, she wept softly. Not from shame, not even from hurt, but from something she hadn't felt in so long she forgot its name. Relief. The next morning, she braided her hair in a single plait and rode out to the ridge alone. She sat there, overlooking the valley, legs tucked under her, watching the mist curl upward like prayers that didn't ask for anything. When she returned, he was waiting with a bucket of clean water and a small parcel. Inside was a bar of hand-milled soap, lavender and sage. She held it and nearly laughed. I don't smell that bad, she teased. He didn't smile. But he said, no. But I thought you'd like something soft. Later, while washing her hands, she did not think of gowns or gossip or pearl necklaces. She thought of how it felt to breathe in a house without echoes. And for the first time since arriving, she began to hum a tune that had no origin and no words. It simply belonged to her. That night, while folding linens by firelight, she found her reflection in the windowpane. Not the old girl, not the fallen lady, not the bride purchased for her silence. Just herself, still standing, still here, still becoming. The envelope was thick, the wax seal intact, red as dried blood. She found it wedged between the ranch ledger and the newspaper, a silent accusation pressed flat by the weight of grain prices and local gossip. It hadn't been sent to her name, not the name she now wore, but the old one, the one with the hyphen and the hush behind it. Someone had known. Someone had whispered. She held it a long time before opening it. Her fingers trembled as they broke the seal, not out of fear, but the ghost of it. Some pains linger, waiting for their moment to rattle the bones. The letter began without preamble. No endearment. No kindness. You've disgraced the family enough. If you have any dignity left, you'll sign the enclosed and disappear entirely. Your brother's engagement depends on it. Your mother is unwell from the shame. She read it twice, not because she didn't understand, but because part of her hoped the ink would rearrange, soften, apologize. It didn't. The enclosure was a legal document. Surrender of inheritance. Declaration of moral unfitness. A document written in cold hands and colder intentions. She folded it once, set it aside, stared at the fire for a long time. He entered quietly, dust clinging to his coat, mud on his boots. He smelled of pine bark and saddle leather. He set the bridle down, glanced toward the table. You got word. I did. He didn't ask what it said. She didn't volunteer. She sat still until the fire snapped, then rose, went to the basin, and washed her hands as if the paper had left soot on her skin. He waited near the door, not distant, not prying, present like weather. "I should go back," she said softly, drying her hands on her skirt. He didn't answer. "If I sign it, my brother marries well. My mother's name is saved. I can vanish like they wanted." He crossed the room. Not fast, not slow, just steady. "Would you be safe?" he asked. "No." "Would you be seen?" She looked up then. His face was calm, but his jaw was tight. "No," she said again. "Just useful." "Then don't go." Her throat burned. "They were once my whole world. And now—" She touched the brooch, still hidden in the drawer. "Now I'm not sure what they were." He nodded. "That's enough to stay." The storm came that night. Not with thunder, but wind that howled like regret through the rafters. Dust swept across the porch in wild spirals. She stood in the doorway, watching trees bend like knees in prayer. Inside, the fire flickered low. He stepped behind her, blanket in hand. Not to wrap her, to offer open-palmed. She took it, sat by the hearth, unfolded the legal paper, and stared at it again. The rain began, sharp and sideways. "What did you do wrong?" he asked, voice quiet as the flame. She blinked. "I existed the wrong way." His brow furrowed. "I didn't love who I was supposed to love. I didn't stay quiet when it would have helped. I said no to a man with power. I protected someone my father wanted to shame." He sat beside her, not touching, just near. "I was told to take the blame, so I did. And when I refused to wear it forever, I was told to leave." He nodded once. "You didn't do wrong." She laughed, bitter. "Then why does it still feel like I owe them something?" "Because they taught you shame before you learned your own name." Silence again. But it wasn't empty. Later, she stood and went to the stove, lit it again, made tea with trembling hands. He joined her at the table, rough fingers brushing flour from the counter. She set the cup down in front of him. "Would you think less of me if I went back?" He shook his head. "I'd worry." "Why?" "Because out there you were a problem to fix. Here you're just real." She felt the tears before they came. Not sobs, not performance, just quiet drops running clean down her face. "I didn't think kindness could feel this sharp." "It cuts through lies," he said. She burned the letter before dawn. Not in rage, not even ceremony, just purpose. The fire licked the parchment slowly. The ink ran. The seal cracked. She watched until it curled into ash. When the ranch hand came in that morning, he said nothing about her red eyes. Just handed her the ledger. "You know the numbers better than me. Figure you can tally cattle feed." She took the book, nodded. The townsfolk noticed. Of course they did. Small places carry secrets like boots carry mud. Never for long. They whispered in the pews. Speculated in the dry goods aisle. That girl. That blue velvet bride. She was trouble, they said. She ran from something, they said. She'll do it again. The preacher's wife was the loudest. She waited until Sunday, then let her voice rise in judgment, masked as prayer. "May the Lord guide those who abandon duty for desert lusts." The church was silent. She stood, slowly, calmly, turned to face the rows of eyes that had never asked her name. "I've done more good here than I ever did in a house filled with gold frames and closed doors." No one interrupted. "I was a ghost in lace," she continued. "Here I mend things. I feed horses. I count feet. I sleep without shame." The preacher cleared his throat. She stepped forward. "I don't owe you a clean past," she said, "but I've earned a peaceful present." Then she walked out. Not hurried, not bowed. He was waiting outside the chapel. He hadn't gone in. Said it felt more like theater than sanctuary. When she reached him, he tipped his hat. "You done?" "I am." They walked home in silence. She carried her shoes. He didn't ask why. That night, she placed a lavender sprig on the windowsill and slept dreamless. The ranch shifted, slowly, like winter giving way to seed. She taught one of the neighbor's girls how to braid hair without pulling, helped the ranch hand with his letters. sat with the widow, and learned to cook beans that didn't burn. People stopped staring. Some even smiled, not because they forgot her story, but because she'd written her own ending, or maybe just a better middle. He came to her door one night, carrying a chipped cup. "Storm's coming again," he said. "Don't want to spook the mare alone." She followed him out. They checked the barn latches, secured the grain. When the wind picked up, she didn't flinch. He looked at her, then said something she never expected. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not leaving." She stepped closer. Not enough to touch, just enough to be touched by the moment. "You made staying feel safe." The wind howled louder, but inside her, there was calm. Not the calm of silence, the calm of survival. The kind that comes when storms come and you no longer run. He reached up, brushed a hair from her brow. "You're not what they said." "I know." He nodded. She stood there a while longer. When the first drop fell, cold and sure, she didn't move. He stood beside her, his presence a steady hum. She had burned the past. But more than that, she had stayed. The hills turned golden by mid-season, dry grass swaying like wheat in a slow-danced waltz. The wind softened. The horses grew calm. A hush settled over the land, not of silence, but of understanding. She had begun to walk without fear. Into town, into dusk, into conversation. The widow asked her to help with Sunday meals. The ranch hand let her handle the mare alone. Even the banker stopped calling her the bride and began using her name. But it wasn't their recognition she needed. It was her own. He came to her one morning with a letter, dusty and travel-worn. No seal this time, just scrawled ink, and a name she hadn't heard aloud in nearly a year. "Your brother is getting married next month. All is quiet now. You could return. No one speaks of what happened. Your place is still here, if you want it." There was no apology, only a beckoning, a re-invitation into the cage. She stood on the porch, holding the letter, feeling the old walls of her life breathe against her skin. He watched her read it, his arms crossed, face unreadable. Not worried, not expectant. "I won't ask you to stay," he said. "I know. I won't ask you to go." She looked out over the fields. The sun had caught the roof of the barn and painted it gold. Somewhere, a hawk shrieked its freedom into the sky. "I won't go," she said. He nodded, but didn't smile. He wasn't the smiling kind. Later that week, they rode to the ridge. The place where the sky touched the land in a slow embrace. He brought a lunch. She brought the book of poems. They didn't speak much, but that was their language now. Soft moments, half gestures, the kind of presence that asked nothing but offered everything. He handed her an old box, made of pine, smoothed by time. Inside was a ring. No stone. No flourish. Just silver shaped by hand. "I don't need a wedding," she said quietly. "I do," he answered. "Not for show. For anchor." She took the ring, slipped it on. There was no kiss. No fanfare. But the ridge remembered. They married under the cottonwoods behind the house. She wore the old blue velvet dress, cleaned and hemmed. He wore his Sunday shirt. The widow cried. The ranch hand gave her a knife, practical, sharp, and beautiful. "A symbol," he said, "of surviving clean." No one from the east came. No one was missed. The ceremony was brief. A preacher spoke. The words were simple. The sun lit her hair like fire. When the preacher asked if she came of her own will, she looked at her husband and said, "Yes, for once." They built the ranch together now, not just in timber and tack, but in people. She took in a girl who'd fled a gambler father, let her sleep in the spare room, fed her stew, and handed her a brush without judgment. He found a boy with crooked legs wandering near the creek, gave him a job sorting nails. Later, built him a saddle that wouldn't throw his balance. They didn't call it charity. They called it home. Her hands grew calloused, her shoulders stronger, but her eyes stayed soft. He changed too, just not loudly. He began leaving flowers by the well, carving things out of wood he never showed anyone but her. Once, she caught him reading aloud to the dog. She never teased him for it. Their love was not the stuff of novels. It didn't shout, but the town watched. They saw how he waited for her to finish speaking before he spoke. They saw how she leaned into his silences like they were lullabies. When the old preacher's wife fell ill, she brought soup, sat by the bed, held the woman's hand when no one else would. No sermons, no apologies, just presence. "Maybe I was wrong about you," the woman whispered. "Maybe I was wrong about me too," she replied. One autumn evening, a man rode into town with polished boots and a silver tongue. Claimed to know her name, the old one. She met him in the general store, stood tall in her worn apron and dust-covered hem. He smiled with the same East Coast smirk she'd once feared. "Didn't expect to find you in a place like this. I didn't expect to want to stay in one." He leaned close. "They're still talking about you. You made quite the scandal. I made peace." He chuckled. "That all you want?" She tilted her head. "Yes. And I have it. So ride on." He blinked, and she turned her back. The town remembered that moment. They spoke of it like myth. The day the blue velvet bride became iron beneath cotton. Winter crept in with a gentler hand that year. Snow dusted the fence posts like sugar. She watched it fall with a blanket over her knees and a dog curled at her feet. He came in one night, wind-bitten and quiet. "There's trouble on the North Ridge," he said. "What kind?" "Strangers. Maybe drunk. Maybe worse." She didn't ask if she should worry. She knew she was safe. He rode out with the ranch hand. Returned hours later, clothes torn, knuckles raw, but upright. The strangers gone. No one hurt. "You all right?" she asked. "Tired," he said. And that was the end of it. He never bragged. Never made himself the center. But that night, as he slept, she traced the bruise on his arm with gentle fingers and whispered, "Thank you." In spring, they planted lilacs. She sang while digging, tuneless, but full of joy. He hummed along. The girl they'd taken in began reading again. The boy with the crooked legs outgrew 3 pairs of boots. She found herself smiling more. Not because life got easier, but because it had meaning. One morning, while feeding the hens, she found the brooch in her coat pocket. The ivory one, the East, the past. She stared at it, then walked to the creek, tossed it in. The water took it like it had been waiting. That night, she told him. He only said, "Took you long enough." They laughed, and it echoed down the hills. Years passed, quietly, steadily, like good rains. Their story was never printed. No portraits hung in saloons. But people remembered. The woman who came from nothing and built something better. The man who said little but meant every word. Their porch held more stories than any book. Their table, more grace than any church. They never left the land. It became part of them. One dusk, long after the cottonwoods had grown tall, she sat on the porch alone, eyes on the horizon. He stepped behind her, wrapped her in his arms. The sky turned gold, and somewhere in the hush between heartbeats, she whispered, "We did it, didn't we?" His voice, rough and reverent, answered, "We did. No guns, no scandal, no ballroom redemption. Just 2 people who chose each other again, and again, and again. Not for drama, for peace." And the West, wide and watching, remembered them well.